So when I was growing up, I grew up very differently than most of the children around me. I grew up in a lot of domestic violence and abuse. I also grew up in poverty, and I grew up with a lot of inconsistency, and um, a lot of the children around me just, I could not relate to them, and they could not relate to me. So I didn't have a lot of friends growing up, especially the older I got, the worse it got. And I had to come to a point where I realized that my experiences were not what I should be basing what's normal or normalized normal on. A lot of people, when they're surrounding themselves with other people, or they are, as they're growing up, surrounded with people, whether they chose them or not, they get into a sense of this is kind of normalized. I remember when I was 9 years old was the moment I realized other kids don't live the way that I do. And up to that point, I sort of just thought every kid is kind of scared of their parents, and every kid, is hungry sometimes, and every kid, is kind of miserable sometimes, and every kid doesn't want to be home and wants to be out in the woods. I thought that was normal. I didn't realize that other children didn't live the way that I did. So being abused all the time didn't affect me in the same way. But when I was 9 and I realized, I went absolutely into a deep dark depression. I very sadly made my first attempt at my own life when I was 9. I was distraught. I was extremely distraught. And I spent all of my teenage years and everything still very distraught, depressed, miserable. It was a very hard thing for me. And 2 days after I graduated high school, I got out. I got out of that environment, and I started to have to encounter other people who were my own age, trying to get my act together. I was sleeping on a couch, and one of my aunts said, go get some sort of degree. You're gonna have such a hard time getting a job and having some sort of a future for yourself if all you have is a high school diploma. And so I went to a 2-year college and got an associate's degree. And I had to work while I was doing that. I had 2 jobs plus internship while doing that. It was very hard on me. But one of the hardest parts for me was the social aspect. I had other students my own age that I was so far removed from their reality. And I had to accept that my experiences do not determine facts, do not determine what is going on in other people's lives. And so I became very interested on other people's lives. I wanted to talk to people. I wanted to learn about them. And I often, almost all the time, have found that other people have very different experiences than me, quite commonly. And I also have found that a lot of times people who have similar experiences are drawn toward each other. And it can create this vacuum where you feel like this is what's normal. This is what's actual. For instance, I have volunteered a lot in the LGBT plus community, and a lot of them that I have encountered, and not all, this is generalizations, this is not 100%, a lot of them tend to be really drawn to each other because a lot of them have felt so much rejection or pain or suffering, especially trans kids, that they're very drawn to each other, and they feel like, man, everybody's gone through really crappy stuff or has parents who don't treat them nice or whatever it is, and so they're really quick to jump to that conclusion. I was with a LGBT plus person recently, and a mom was talking with her child, and we didn't know them at all, this mom and this child, and the mom was telling the kid, don't call your biological father dad, call your stepdad dad, because your biological father doesn't deserve to be called dad. And the kid was like, well, I don't understand, because they were a kid and stuff. And the and the LGBT plus person that I was with, the young person, they were like, should we go over there and say something to that mom? And I was like, what? And I was like, we don't know what's going on with them. We have no idea what situation that is. And they were like, well, the kid should be able to do what they need to do, and the mom should accept that. And I was like, okay, but we don't know that the kid needs to do that. It could be that their dad, they see them once a year, and he's like an alcoholic. He could be in jail, and he like molested his kid. You don't know what's going on there. You have no idea. So why are you wanting to get involved? And they're like, but what if the kid's like gay or something and the dad's the only one who accepts them? And I'm like, why are you jumping to that instantaneous conclusion when that's not the norm? In reality, the LGBT plus community is a smaller part of the human population. And so the majority of the time, it's not going to be that the kid's LGBT plus and the parents not accepting them, because the majority of the time, the kid's not even going to be LGBT plus. LGBT plus is a minority. And so I was like, you're taking your personal experiences and you're putting them on this random mom and kid. Now, it could have been they were right. There is not a 100% chance that that kid wasn't LGBT plus and their dad wasn't the only one who accepted them. That absolutely is a possibility. But the odds are higher that it was something else that was going on. But it was hard and difficult for the LGBT plus person that I was with, and this was like a week ago. It was very hard for them because their personal experiences were determining their idea of what reality was like. And I have had to confront that a lot in my own life. Statistically, the majority of children actually grow up not in some sort of horrifically abusive environment. That's statistically. And I can know that and I can be aware of that. And yet when I volunteer with children, because I didn't have somewhere safe when I was growing up, I always try to make sure when kids are with me for however much time it is, it could be for half an hour, whatever it is, they're going to feel safe during that time. They're going to know nothing bad is going to happen to them during that time. They're going to know that it's okay for them to exist. It's okay for them to be themselves during this period of time. I can't change the rest of their life. I have no idea what's going on at home. But if I'm volunteering, I used to soccer coach, for instance, and I would have a group of kids. I would always assume at least one of those kids is being abused at home. I have no idea which one. And it could be possible it was none of them. But I would assume to myself, one of these kids is being abused. I have no idea which one. I will never know which one. I will never know if I was right. But that kid is going to feel safe. And I just treat it that way. When I'm making an assumption, I am doing it based on my own experience, but I have to recognize that the majority of kids are not growing up the way that I did. The majority of kids are not experiencing some of the things that I experienced. And that does not in any way, shape, or form mean that the kid doesn't have some kind of hardship. I mean, all of us have hard things we deal with and go through and have to get resilient about. There is no one's life who's just like, wow, every single aspect of my life is completely perfect and without challenge. Like that's not realistic. But it is unrealistic to say, well, because I've experienced this, this is what this is like. And I have had to deal with that about judging. I grew up, unfortunately, with an extremely abusive birth mother. And when my father eventually remarried, I fought with my new mom. I screamed and fought with her because I was used to being the quote-unquote adult, the quote-unquote one in charge, when my mother wasn't around. And she wanted to be an actual mom. And to her credit, she did not give up. It took years before we finally got to a point where it was like, oh wow, this woman actually wants to be my mom. And I've never had a mom before. So this is scary for me because it's foreign. It's unfamiliar territory. But as foreign as it is that as uncomfortable as it is, it's actually a really good thing. And I eventually got to the point where now I love my mom. My mom is technically my stepmom, but my mom is so kind and so generous and big-hearted and warm, and you can't walk into her house without her instantly filling you with hospitality. You know, she is just that kind of person. And that warmth that comes from her, I did not grow up with that at all. So at first it felt intrusive. It felt very, very uncomfortable. And I judged her. I thought, oh, well, she's just manipulating me, or she's just I looked for all these different angles based on my experience with my birth mother. And I even had issues with other people. I would see them with their parent, and their parent would be like pushing them on the swing or at the park, or, you know, they would be like giving them warm hugs, and, you know, it's just like, what's really going on there? Like, I was very, very judgmental. I was very harsh. I was very critical when I was younger, when I was like a teenager and stuff. I was very closed off toward other people. I didn't trust. There were like one or two people I trusted, and then everyone else was just, the majority of people are bad. Statistically, that's not true. And I eventually had to get to a point where I had to understand that statistics are not like, oh, here's 100% accuracy, you can, you know, count on this forever. But it helps me understand the difference between my experience and what might actually be reality. Because I have seen so many people in my life that I have worked with base things on their experience. I have seen so many, like, for instance, I've met multiple women who had one really bad experience with a guy, and they write off all men. Statistically, the majority of men are not actually like douchebags. Statistically, there's like one guy who treats women crappy across the board. And because he has so many interactions with so many different women, women think all guys are like this crappy guy who's treating me crappy. And that one guy, he's a jerk. He should not be doing that. I do not condone his behavior at all. But it sucks that the rest of the guys who are not being crappy get looped in. And it sucks that the guy who is being crappy oftentimes doesn't say, oh, I'm not going to cross certain lines. He doesn't care if he crosses certain lines. So that guy who treats women crappy, he sometimes will cross like legality lines and treat women in ways that are flat out illegal. And then it creates fear. So not only is this guy creating like disgust, but this guy is outright creating fear. And so then the next time, you know, that woman that he hurt encounters a guy, her guard is way up. She's ready to bolt. She is not okay. And she's outright like somewhat traumatized. And yet the guy sitting in front of her didn't do anything bad to her at all. But because of her experiences with the previous guy, she can't see that. I've seen men who hate women because maybe they had a belligerent mother, or they had like one girlfriend who cheated on them, or whatever it is. So they think, oh yeah, women can't be trusted. Women only want, you know, a guy who's wealthy and tall, and they won't accept anything less than that, and they're so shallow. Women are so shallow. I've met guys who are like that, and I'm like, dude. Statistically, the majority of women are not like that. Statistically. Which means your experience might not be based on generalized reality. And generalized reality is an important thing to understand. What is normal to you is not what is normal for everyone. And I see this a lot in the United States of America with things like, for instance, religion. I've seen so many people who go to church all the time, and so they have this concept of religion that is based solely on that. When in reality, there are so many religions. There's 200, or I think it's more than 200 denominations just in Christianity. And yet, to them, what's normal is just their one single pigeonhole. I've seen this a lot with like like racism. Like, people are surrounded by certain people, and so then they think another culture is like, they want to be kind of away from it, or they're intimidated by it. Maybe they're afraid, or they make assumptions. They're like, oh yeah, this certain group of people, they're all criminals because they encountered one who did something wrong, or maybe they knew someone. Maybe it wasn't even their own experience. They're basing it on a story that someone else told them from someone else's experience. It's a negative thing to say my experiences are the only thing I'm basing my judgments on reality on. Now, do I think you should base everything solely on statistics? No. There is something to be said for having an experience and being able to say, here's my repertoire of stuff that I have, here's my evidence that I have, that I've built up myself. But you have to counterbalance that with, what are the experiences of other people? Where are the places that I have had it better, and where are the places that I've had it worse? I grew up in a lot of unfortunate circumstances, but you know what I did have? Siblings. I've met so many people who were an only child, and they would have done anything for a sibling. They were miserable being an only child. I've also met people who were an only child and loved it, but I have met more people who were an only child and wished they had a sibling. I had multiple siblings. I have quite a few siblings. That's something that I had growing up. That is a quality thing, a good thing. And I've seen people like want to play the whose life is worse game, and they really cling to their experiences, and they get almost competitive about it, when reality is so much bigger than just your personal experiences. Your personal experiences matter, and they do help to shape you and to guide you, but having an understanding that other people live differently than you, other people do things differently than you, other people like things that you don't like, and other people dislike things that you like, it's a really important thing. When I was growing up, there were times that I was forced to eat things, even if I was made sick by them. And because the authority figure liked the food, I was required to eat the food and like the food. Turns out later I was allergic. That's why I kept getting sick. That didn't change anything. It was still required. Even though I would end up sick, it still did not change that I was required to like that, because the authority figure, the adult in my life, liked that. And so I realized, just because someone else likes something doesn't mean I do. And just because I like something, maybe they won't. And I think that helped me get to where I could be open to the idea that my personal experiences were not the same as other people's, and that was okay. That it's okay that we're all different. It's okay that not everyone is the same. We like to put things into nice, clean boxes so that concepts are really smooth and easy for us. But in reality, individual people are very individual. And like, it's not actually true that things are so black and white. Black and white thinking is very, very closed off and does not reflect reality almost ever. You could say, well, some things are black and white. To me, the things that are black and white are, for instance, pedophilia. Like, that extreme of a thing. But if you say stealing is black and white, I feel like desperation causes people to do crazy things sometimes. And we view stealing as, oh, that person stealing a candy bar, or oh, that person, going into your house and breaking into a safe. We don't view stealing as, oh, that employer didn't pay you full wages. Oh, you know what? You're working overtime for free. You're being robbed. We don't look at stealing in the same way for everybody. And so we're basing it on ideas and perceptions instead of Statistically, who steals the most are corporations. And yet, what comes to our mind when we think of stealing is not a corporation. Statistically, you might say, oh, well, some things are black and white, like with people, like, I've heard lots of people say male and female. What about the thousands of babies a year who are born intersex? They are born with characteristics of both sexes on their physical anatomy. What about them? You toss some sort of term onto their birth certificate, and what if you're wrong? A ton of the time, doctors are wrong. That's why we don't cut those babies anymore. We used to do genital mutilation on intersex babies, trying to normalize them into male and female. And in actuality, that's not black and white. It's black and white about Democrats versus Republicans. It's black and white about whatever, anything. You can take anything and realize that almost everything is not actually black and white. Only very, very extreme things. The majority of things are very, this situation changes stuff, or these circumstances were different for this person than this person. And so they reacted in different ways. And you can't just put an expectation on an entire people's or an entire group's based on one experience. And I have to remind myself of that, because my experiences don't say that. My experiences tell me otherwise. And sometimes we really, really have to check ourselves, and we have to say, is my experience based in reality? Or is my experience, my single experience, my thing that's happened? And it's a hard thing to do. And I've seen lots of people be really dismissive of people when they express their experiences. You would not believe the amount of people that I have seen who don't believe someone when they say they're allergic to a food. Like, a lot. And it is true that there's a difference between a food allergy and a food intolerance, but like, it's not doctors who are being dismissive. It's not doctors and people educated in professional health who are being dismissive. The ones being dismissive are like, oh, I'm sure you can eat this, or I didn't tell you that was in there because I didn't think it'd be a problem, or I didn't believe you. Oh, that was a test. I've even seen that before. There was a little older woman who actually tested it once. I was like, like a guy who's like, oh yeah, this girl, she says that, this dude did bad things to her. Well, your only experiences with the guy are positive, but her experiences with the guy were extremely negative. Instead of saying my experiences are the only ones that are valid and being dismissive of hers, take both and try to reassess. Say, well, I can see good things in this guy, but if there's these negative things in this guy too, maybe I should reassess my relationship with this guy, and I should reassess his behavior and look for things more strongly, because I haven't really been looking, because I didn't have a reason to look, because I didn't think anything was the matter. I've seen women who really go after each other. Like, they get really, really aggressive toward each other and territorial almost with each other. And it's like, why are you doing that? Well, I've had women before who just, like, they didn't have my back, they weren't my girl, they are skeevy, they stole my boyfriend, whatever it is. And I'm like, okay, but why are you treating this woman that you literally have just encountered today in that way? Like, your past experiences do not determine reality. They're based in your reality, but they're not based in the generalized overall world reality. And it can be really important to be aware that other people's experiences just flat out might not be the same as yours. It's really important to know that your experiences are valid, but other people's experiences are valid as well. And what goes on the majority of the time is what the odds are highest of happening. If you look at a history of, say, a stock in the stock market, if the majority of the time it stayed pretty level, it's pretty consistent, it's pretty expected then that it will remain that way. If you look at the history of things that are consistent, that consistency can stay decently level, and it might not match your experience. And you have to reassess and say, I need to be a little bit on guard because I've had this experience. This experience has taught me things. But also, I can accept that it's not all the time, and that this is a personal issue I have. This isn't 100% of every situation. Not everyone in this group is like that just because someone from this group did that. And you can even do that in like positive ways too. Like, I've seen a lot of people who are really negative about like Middle Eastern people, but when I was growing up, I was a very miserable person, and there was a Middle Eastern woman, a Persian woman, who was extremely kind, and she was one of the only people who was nice to me. And so I have a really positive sentiment toward Middle Eastern people in general. And there's a part of me that has to be like, okay, but they're just people. Some people are nicer than others. Everyone has some, vices in them and some talents in them. Everyone has some, light and darkness in them. Everyone has some different ratios of, here's some positive things and here's some negative things. And I have to actually remind myself, not everyone is going to be as nice as the next person just because I have this really positive experience with one. You have to balance things out and not be so black and white to be able to live in reality. Otherwise, you're living in a fantasy or a delusion, and they can even be negative fantasies and delusions. They can be very limiting and impacting on your life. And a life of freedom and expansion is so much warmer and so much more fulfilling than a life of constriction and isolation.